application, it then uses our standardized process based on what we have at the end of the year. Because I mentioned we raise everything that we spend, and so again, we don't want to commit to things that we may or may not have in advance. So really, it's a priority to standardize and make the process equitable. And so looking at that, we do have that process, but throughout the year we have the opportunity to submit letters of inquiry and proposals for things that you are working on as an organization, and those will be evaluated, and we do more of a micro granting process right now.
Okay, so if you leave here today with anything that I've said today, write this down. The best thing I can recommend for you is to go to our website, if you have not done so already, at www.arcf.org and look at our grants page and sign up to be on our newsletter if you have not done that so far. We do not send any kind of spam mails or anything like that. All that is used for is for any type of grant cycles that are open around the state will come to you when those are available. Traditionally, what we do through all of our affiliates, those 29 affiliates around the state, is we have what we call Giving Tree cycles, and those are twice a year, one in the spring and one in the winter. Oh, well, let's see. They run at weird times, and they're called weird times, but it's July and January. So look for those dates, and it's a 6-week period. The discretionary grants that we give out, remember I said that was like literally 1% of what we give out. Those grants are relatively small, I'd say $2,500 and below. And we have tooled the application process to reflect that. It is not a difficult grant to fill out. We do not want this to be encumbersome for anybody, so we're constantly working to make that easily accessible for everybody. Now, what you're probably sitting there going is, how do I access that 99% of the big funds that you give out, right? Well, there's not an official way to do that. But when you fill out the Giving Tree grants for your local affiliate, that helps us as area directors know what's going on in the community. Those 99% of funds are individuals that we work with one-on-one to help direct their giving. So when you apply for your Giving Tree grant, it gives me an idea of what's going on in the community and what things need to be funded. If I have a donor who is interested in early childhood and you've submitted a proposal for that through Giving Tree and it's one we can or cannot fund, it helps me have a conversation with the fund holder who regularly gives out $250,000 a year versus our $2,500 grants. So even if you may not think that it's a great fit for what our grant cycle is that time, go ahead and fill one out. I always tell people to do this because it helps me understand, or just call me on the phone and let's talk about what you're doing. But make sure you sign up for that so you're getting notices. With that, signing up online, sometimes we have grant cycles that run throughout the whole state. We've done some things with your organization for arts funding, and there may be an organization in the Delta that meets the criteria of what you're doing here locally. So you want to make sure you're on that list and you'll be notified if there's some statewide grants that you might be available for as well.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing on that too, is sign up for newsletters. I mean, if that's the way you learn about the opportunities as well, because if you're going and researching all that time, that's just a way to get it right in your inbox and keep an eye on what organizations and funders are offering.
And also what Stacey mentioned about filling out the applications within the community fund, that exact same thing happened to the Women's Foundation. We filled out an application for grant funding. It was through a grant through the Community Foundation. We did not get that, but a donor
looking at you, Stacey.
I don't think that was part of the fund at the Community Foundation. It flagged our work for him, and he was like, I want to invest in this, so he invested in that program. And so it does actually
It
work.
works that way.
Apply.
Yeah.
I'll encourage you to apply.
And that's a great thing. There's no's. There's a lot of no's in application process, and that's just part of it. It's a ratio as well. So that's a really good example.
I'm so happy that has a good happy ending.
And
I do want to share that unfortunately the Fayetteville area affiliate does not participate in this upcoming grant cycle. So the January one is the only one that we do participate in because we have limited discretionary funds. I know people think that's weird because it's Northwest Arkansas, but we do. But if you serve Carroll County or Sebastian County, Crawford County, those affiliates are all participating in this next run of grants. So feel free to apply to them.
Well, just on that note, we do, with all grant programs, there are no's, but at least with mine, and I'm not sure about y'all's, but we do allow people to resubmit. And in the instance of my grant programs, if you resubmit and it's a good project, something that has already been, if it's an eligible project, it just wasn't selected for that cycle, they typically get a higher ranking on the next cycle. So it's not 100% that if you're not chosen that first cycle and the second cycle you'll get it, but you do get a higher ranking because we do try to fund those resubmits that have come through if they are eligible projects. Now, if they're not eligible, we have to start over, but just wanted to throw that in. Don't give up.
That's a great tip. Thank you. So a question that you all had that follows up on that is, what makes a grant applicant stand out to you? You have more applications, I assume, than you can fund. So what makes someone stand out when they submit an application to you?
Currently, with the decisions coming from the governor's office and the Arkansas legislature, we are funding as many emergency projects as we can. So that would be emergency gear for fire departments, Jaws of Life for fire departments, storm life-saving storm equipment or storm sirens, storm shelters, things along those lines. Where I've seen we love to fund community projects for parks or for community centers, but sadly, because we have all of these emergency projects coming through, those do get bumped down. And so I try to tell people to highlight their grant project and frame it not to, elaborate and say that it's an emergency that you need a community center for some reason, but really highlighting the urgency or the need if there is one. Because then I can actually push that through and sell it, to our commissioners and our executive director that this is an urgent need. We do need to fund it because, unfortunately, where we are right now, we're just receiving so many of these applications. We don't have a ton of money to give out. We have approximately $700,000 each year to give out for rural community and about 1.5 this year for block. But we have to prioritize those urgent ones coming forward. So if you can show me how your project is an emergency or just a very urgent need for your community, that will 100% make it stand out for my purposes with our grant programs.
So we're an arts organization. So we work with other arts organizations and artists. And for our grants, what we look for is we walk through this in workshops as well, but there's review and selection criteria. So a lot of time we definitely focus on that. Our application process usually includes like an artist statement or an arts organization mission statement, vision, work samples, project description, because our grants are project-based. And so we build rubrics according to that too. And what I find myself too, as an artist applying for funding, applying for grants can be difficult, and that process it takes a lot of energy and time to apply for these things. You don't get paid for applying for them unless that's part of your role within the organization. And so we offer, that support to help with that. But project descriptions, that's usually where there's a struggle. And so being able to identify clearly what your project is and what you're applying for. So there's different levels throughout that process, but we're looking at those elements of the grant requirements.
Our review committee likes to see, and I also like to see, the details matter. So include the details to just ensure that we understand that this is either an organization or a program that is really well thought out. Like we've thought of as many things as we could think of before we start this program, or we've learned these things because we've been doing this program, or we've been an organization for so many years, and here's what we've learned. Here are the details, and an idea of proof of capacity. So if we get XYZ funding, we can do ABC, and we have the partnerships, and we have the team, we have the capacity to make this happen. If we're funded, then this is exactly what we'll be able to do, and here's how we'll do it. I think details and proof of capacity are really important, as well as we like to see participant-led programming. So, programs or organizations that are based on the lived experiences of the folks that are being so have there been conversations with the people that are being served by your organization or your program, and is it built on those conversations? Are they involved with the programming? Is the team and the volunteers or the board, are they all aligned and buying in? And so really seeing like a collaborative buy-in from the folks that are running it, but also the folks that created and are continuing the program, if that makes sense.
So I would say that for the Fayetteville area affiliate, we are currently in a strategic 5-year plan cycle where we are focusing on proposals that that deal with children living in poverty. Statewide, we have some matching grants for early childhood literacy and for food security. So proposals that fit one of those 3 areas are kind of a priority right now for our board. If you are able to mesh those 2 things together, 3 things, then you've really got probably something that's going to stand out for us. For example, some of the things we funded this spring, like library programs where they're feeding lunch. So you're hitting both of those categories there, and that we can tap into some matching funds from our state office to help us fund those types of things. So right now, that is the priority, and that will continue through the next fiscal year. It may change after that, but for right now, that's kind of what we're looking at. And again, the proposals for us, we're not looking for anything terribly flashy. If you're not a development professional, that's fine. I actually kind of like the rough ones. I kind of like the people that aren't in development. I've been in development my whole career, and I kind of like a rough one every now and then. It's kind of fun to read, and that's not polished to the nth degree. Somebody who's just kind of out there doing their thing and they've got a need. We perceive those just as highly as the professional ones, so feel free to apply.
I'll say too, so our website is cashcreate.org, and on there we offer a lot of programming, professional development program that offers support for grant writing, communications, for nonprofits. So it's a great resource as you're applying and looking at opportunities to get connected into those resources.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. I want to flip to the other side of things, which is if an organization has received a grant from you and is one of your grantees, we have a question of what do you like to see in your relationship with the grantee besides just submitting the required reports beyond that? And could I start with you, Stacy?
Sure,
just to
that's
work
fine.
the other way.
That's fine.
You're welcome, Becca.
I don't really have a lot to add to this except just stay in touch with me. I do like a follow-up. If you've, I just the other day went to a unveiling of a children's wall mural in Farmington, and I had a donor who funded that, and he's an anonymous donor. So I went for him, and I took pictures, and I was able to send those back to him. But and again, they don't have a development professional, but one of their library people reached out to me and invited me to come to this, and I went, and it was great. So I think follow-up that you can ever do, if it's obviously capacity building, there's not a lot to look at there and take pictures of. But if it's project-based, program-based like that, something we can come out and visit with, we can help promote you on our social media as well. But yeah, we just kind of like to see what you're doing with the money. The required reports are great, but a phone call or an email just kind of giving us an update is great too.
I'll just piggyback off that. We're quite similar. We actually don't have a lot of reporting requirements. It takes a lot of time and effort, and we would much rather see the work being done. We're really interested in qualitative information, some testimonials from program participants, just exactly what Stacy said, just a follow-up and say, here's how it's going, or a follow-up and say, we're actually really struggling and we could use some help. And so then we can really leverage our resources and say, okay, we may know somebody at the state in economic development, or we may know somebody in a different organization or in the community. And so we also like to hear when things aren't going well. So let us know, because we've invested in this program. But as they are going well, we love to hear the wins. I'll give an example. A couple of years ago, we gave a $10,000 grant. So it wasn't a huge grant, but we gave it to an organization actually up here in Northwest Arkansas, and they were creating a matching fund for savings for women as they were exiting their program. And so they were encouraging women to create a savings fund, and the incentive was that they would match it. So we gave this grant, tested out the model. We loved the idea of the model. And so, I mean, this was like 2 or 3 years ago that we gave this grant. To this day, I still get emails from this organization, and they're like, we had another graduate, and we were able to match $1,000, and now she has $2,000 for her and her family as she starts her new life. And it's like, oh my gosh. And if they ever came and asked for money again, we would have this paper trail of like, look at this success. And I mean, it's an email, like a 2-sentence email 3 years later for a 10,000, like, it's just really, I mean, and those are the ones that really stand out. It doesn't have to be, Dear Women's Foundation, our grant did X, Y, and Z metrics, but it is really cool to hear like those qualitative, those testimonials, because those are the ones that the grant maker really remembers.
Yeah, I'd say communication is key, and that's, ours are project-based, so we'd like to see those projects succeed, and everybody has a different idea of what success looks like for them. That might be, filling a theater or reaching certain communities or testing new ideas. And so we like that communication along the way. And if you're struggling, we want to hear that too, so we can offer support throughout that process. I think it's great to be connected with the organizations and the artists that we work with. So we want to hear about what you're doing, what that process looks like, and how we can help along the way. But wait, the question was on reporting?
What in addition to
Yeah, okay, so, and then also we offer an assessment at the end because we want that feedback. We're constantly adapting our programs and the work that we do based on the feedback with that, so that we can continue to improve as well.
Well, y'all know, state government.
You're very flexible, right, Becca?
Oh, we have so much flexibility. To be truthful, the two that are state funded, we do actually have a lot of flexibility with those. That's our general appropriation. That's a wildlife grant and rural community grant. Again, with the communication, if something happens during the project, I just ask that you give me a call, like if, with everything happening with the weather or, construction costs have just skyrocketed, we can issue modifications, we can issue extensions. We have a lot more flexibility with those two. The block grant, that's the federal one. It is not as flexible, sadly. The paid administrator is literally there to hold the hand of the grantee the entire time. They are in constant communication. They are out looking at the project probably every 3 months, making sure it's on track. So there is a whole lot of communication, just constant checking in on that block grant piece. And then after a grant has actually been closed out or completed, either any of those grants, we really love to see, when communities post things on their social media or do a press release, because then we can share it and we can say, hey, look at this great project. Keep funding us. We still need these. Even though we do have that set aside designated from HUD, and it's in our appropriation budget for the other two, it's still nice to be able to show our legislators and the governor that these projects and these programs are exceptionally needed in the communities. So any positive feedback is excellent that they can share. Like I said, press releases or social media is great. But we pretty much hold everybody's hand throughout the process of closing a grant out, throughout the grant process itself. And then again, with that block grant, it's constant communication.
Thank you. And I love what Becky and Lisa Marie said. Thank you very much for saying that we want to hear when things go wrong, because a lot of grantees, I know, we receive a grant and then we feel tremendous pressure for things to go exactly like we described. And so often, usually, they don't. And then a lot of anxiety of, especially if it's something innovative, it didn't work out like we thought it would. And so I just want to highlight that you all want a partnership in which, we should be free to share that, because it helps you learn.
Yeah, and we say too, there's a fine line with that, because our panelists are reading the applications based on the content in the applications. So we want to stick to that as much as we can, but we communicate and say that projects will change. I mean, we had a pandemic, we have all of, these things that happen, personal lives, and so we understand that things will adapt and change. We just need that communication along the way, and we want to, with that balance of, as far as equity among all applications, because that's what the panelists were reviewing the criteria and the proposal on. So we want to stick to that. But we do say, like, life happens, things happen, so things will shift and adapt along the way.
Yeah, and I don't want to scare people away from from state-funded or federally funded grants, because if something does happen, you know, we do, if we approve the project for what it was originally submitted, we have to stay in that vein. But if something happens and we can't get it done in the initial time frame that you suggested, we can push that out. We do have certain flexibility, but we just can't jump ship on one project and start funding a different project. It has to be the same project or type of project that was applied for in the beginning and approved, because those are approved by the Arkansas Rural Development Commission, the executive director of the AEDC, the governor, and then the Arkansas legislative body. And going through that whole process, again, I assure you, you really, it's a long one. So, but again, I didn't want to, you know, say if you get this grant, you know, from the state, or if it's a block grant that you just can't, you know, do anything, you have to stick within those you know, guidelines that you originally provided. And while you have to stay within the realm of that original project, we do understand that things change. We can push timelines out. We understand.
So stay on the ship. It just may
Stay
change course a little bit.
On the ship, but if the
Yeah.
winds blow
Yeah.
a different direction, we will all navigate to a new location.
Yes.
Together.
I love
Yeah.
this. I love this theme we're developing right up here. This is great.
Nautical.
Well, thank you all for that. I think this might be a good chance for us to take a break, a brief break, now that our coffee's had a chance to settle. So we're going to take about a 10-minute break. Let's come back at 9:55 maybe, and we'll continue with some more questions. So thank you all very much. thank you all so much. We're going to bring it back and continue with a few questions for our panelists. I wanted to say before we get started a couple of things. One is, if you have not been to the Fayetteville Public Library before, or if you're watching this online, you've not been here in person, would really strongly encourage you to come. They have all kinds of amazing programming this summer. If you have children, they have an incredible children's library that is new in the last few years. And so I just wanted to put a plug, as someone that does not work at the library, that I love it. You should come check it out if you haven't been here. The other plug I wanted to put in is for the Grant Professionals Association. So I'm here as a representative of that organization. We're a national organization of grant professionals. We have a chapter in Arkansas that serves the whole state, and our job is to provide networking and support for grant professionals. So how many of you have ever worked on a grant proposal or report or managed a grant program or intend to in the future? Yes, so you are all grant professionals. So I'm talking about all of you specifically. If you do one grant, you're a grant professional. And we would love to see you at any of our events. We do everything virtually, and it's all free. You don't have to be a member. So we just want accessible, support. So gpaarkansas.org is our website. Again, we're part of a national organization, but our chapter serves the whole state. So please join us. We do programming almost monthly, nearly monthly, throughout the year. And we're just also a place where you can ask questions and get support from other grant professionals. It's wonderful. So please join us officially as a member or just drop by for free at any of our programs. So I wanted to put that plug in. Okay, I think if our panelists are ready, we'll get started with a few more questions. First of all, we had a lot of questions about unrestricted funding or operating funding versus program funding. We had several questions that were all worded slightly differently, so I'll try to synthesize. But if you're not familiar, if you're watching this or attending and you're not familiar with the distinction, just really quickly, historically, grant funders, I would say mostly, focus on program funding, which means you have a specific program, a specific thing you're wanting to do that's going to produce a specific outcome, and you apply to a grant and you get funding specifically for that. So you have to spend the money on your program expenses, your supplies, travel, staff, what have you. And then the other type of funding is operating, or some funders call it unrestricted, which means that the funder awards you an amount of money just to support what you do in general, and you can use that money flexibly within your organization. So there was a lot of questions about the difference between those two. In the pandemic, we saw a lot of funders nationwide who normally fund primarily programs turn to general operating or to unrestricted funding just as a way of trying to support urgent needs during the pandemic. And now nationally, we're seeing some of those funders move back to program funding specifically. So I'm trying to synthesize these questions for our panelists, but I would love to know if you do general operating versus program funding, or what your perspective is on those two, that distinction. And maybe I could start. Could we start in the middle? Could I put you on the spot, Becky, to start?
Yes,
and we'll go this way.
Absolutely. So it is interesting to me to look at this shift over time of what funders are focused on, and I think it depends it depends on the funder. I mean, there are funders out there that will fund the whole scope and scale of things, whether that's, program specific, unrestricted. I'm not seeing a huge shift in the folks that we work with, but I am hearing about it nationwide. So I think it is interesting. But I do, with the understanding that we all as organizations, as nonprofit organizations, as grantees, evaluate our work and transition into different focuses, and we're like, okay, what's working, what's having the biggest impact, what can we change, how do we adapt, how do we pivot, everyone's favorite word after COVID. But I think funders are doing the same thing, so I think they're evaluating. We saw this big shift to let's do general operating support, let's do trust-based philanthropy, and that looks different for a lot of funders. And I wonder if maybe it's the nature of these foundations, these larger funders are saying, okay, we really wanted to meet that need. Let's evaluate the impact of that. Are we getting what we need for our board? Are we getting what we need for our founding bodies? What are we seeing the results of that being? So I don't know the answer to these questions, but I'm wondering from the funder side, I mean, these folks want to give out this funding, but they also want to see the impact. And so I'm curious about the ability for nonprofits to be able to show the exact impact of this general operating support. Here's how we were able to expand our staff. Here's how we were able to expand our programming. Here's exactly what came out of that. So I think about that as kind of some maybe tangible advice to answers of questions that we don't have, but how do we show the impact and say this general operating support is truly a game changer for our organization? Here's how it's impacting us, and here's why it's really, really important. Now, if you do have a funder that's transitioning away from general operating support, but you do want to keep them involved, something that we do, and you probably do as well. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, but if you're applying for a specific program, be sure you're including overhead and operational expenses in that application, in that budget. And if it's 20%, if it's 25, if it's 30, if it's higher, like obviously these programs aren't going to exist if your organization doesn't exist. So if it's something the funders really care about, have that conversation with them and say, is operating support something that you can fund? Or here's why our operating support line item and our overhead line item is bigger in this application, is because we need this to be able to do this program. And so I know that a lot of big foundations may be regional or national, and you may not have that open line of communication, but I would encourage trying to at least have that conversation or sending that email or being really explicit in your budget narrative about why maybe that overhead is included. So as much as, again, some funders, and it's just kind of a nature of how their bylaws or how their board is or the decision makers just aren't going to do that general operating support, but they'll do program support that includes general operating funding. So I would encourage you to write that in. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you, Becky.
Yeah, I would offer some of the same input. We're an organization that has applied for operational support. That can be really challenging. It depends on what the funders are looking for, what their deliverables are, what their focus is, what the restrictions are. And so knowing that all funders have different options with that. And then for us, we've been offering project-based funding. So ours was for specific projects that were happening at our venue to activate that. And as we say to artists and organizations as well, to be sustainable, that needs, that support for the work and the time that you're doing needs to be included in that as much as you can, depending on, what the funders fund with that. But I would keep in mind with that programming is to know, so we do that as well. So knowing how many hours that you're putting into that, what that rate is, who on your team is working with that. So keeping those in mind, but also looking at what is the funder funding and what are those restrictions within that and how you can work with that.
We're pretty much program-based. We don't have a whole lot of leeway with that, and that's mainly because we have all of the grant programs that we administer are legislatively approved and have some type of statute that we have to refer back to that enables us to spend that money. I'll give you an example of why we don't have a whole lot of flexibility. During the pandemic, when we were given a bunch of money from the federal government, we operated this Ready for Business grant program. I'm not sure if you guys remember it. We kind of took all the requirements off because we were just trying to let people spend money. We let people have more flexibility with it, and a lot of people abused it. And then we got in trouble on the back end because we were not administering it per the rules that weren't actually set, but they were. And so typically with state government funding or in federal, you're going to see mostly program funded. You're not going to see any leeway because of instances like that Ready for Business grant.
Thank you.
I think Becky summed this up pretty well for us. I'm also seeing an awareness and an educational component to try to, at least within our organization, we are working to try to educate our board on the need for capacity building grants. We even have made that a line item when you apply for a grant through the Giving Tree funds. Is this a program or project based, or instead of unrestricted, we call it capacity building. So that our boards will kind of look at those in two different ways. Again, it depends on who's evaluating as to what their priorities are. Some people get it, some people don't. At least in in what I have seen. So I find that we just know that we as an organization are working to help educate our board members and fund holders on the importance of unrestricted gifts and capacity building grants, but it's a little slow going from what I've seen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Back to our conversation about stewardship. One of the questions that was asked was, do you value visiting your grantees in person? We talked a little bit about the partnership that you all enjoy with your grantees, and I love Stacy's story about the mural. That's wonderful. So can you tell us a little bit about, do you enjoy visiting your grantees in person? Is that something you do? And if so, how do applicants or grantees initiate that? Kind of how do we make that happen? And maybe I could start with you again, Becky.
Yes, absolutely. The answer is yes, please invite us. Absolutely. The Women's Foundation is a relatively small organization. We just created our 6th full-time staff person. So as far as foundations go, we are not a large one, but small but mighty. And we're located in Little Rock, but something that we're really emphasizing right now is a statewide impact and a statewide presence. So we try to travel as many times as we're asked and as many places as we are able to go. But we also have a statewide board. So, you may reach out and say, hey, for example, we funded a program in Jonesboro that's collaborating with Arkansas State, and they're working with girls on some STEM initiatives. And so they were doing all the girls were doing a presentation. It was just a couple weeks ago, and the rest of our team was traveling. But we have a board member at A-State, and so we invited her to go. She went. She took pictures. She sent it to us. She relayed information. We shared it on our social media. So we have board members in Jonesboro, Northwest Arkansas, the River Valley, Southwest Arkansas. Like, we have board members all over the state. We're willing to travel over the state. So we will always accept invitations and try to be there. And if we're not there, we hope you'll send photos and information, because we definitely want to share that with our donors, but also with our wider presence via our newsletter or social media. So yes, we love to visit.
Lisa Marie, Mackenzie?
Yeah, I'd say as a re-grantor, our grantees are in our space, so we see them there, and that's amazing. And in general, as a grantee too, I think that, we're all humans working in organizations, and we're busy with lots of things. And so getting an email or getting an invitation to what organizations and artists are working on, it's a great way to stay on the radar. And I think seeing the impact of how funding is working is so rewarding. So I highly suggest that, even sending, emails along the way, if this is the impact photos and invitations. I think that's something that is super rewarding for everyone involved.
I second everything that they've said 100%. I want to see pictures. I want to come out to see the project in person, take pictures. That way I can relay back to our executive director and our legislators how important the program is. I will say that I'm a team of one, and so I don't get out of the office very often unless it's in between our grant cycles. And so the more I can do at once, the best. So a lot of times I'll kind of plan a tour around a certain area, maybe be there for a couple days, see all the projects that we funded, and then come back and then plan another. So if I can't get there, we do have our community development team. We've got folks in South Arkansas, Northwest, and Northeast. And so if it's not me, they can make that stop for me to check it out. But having those pictures, sharing those stories, it's one of the best ways that I have found to promote the importance of all of our grant programs, because people relate best to tales that they can relate to. If they can see how this funding helped them and help this one community in a specific way, people will latch on to that and say, well, I think I can do that in my community or in my county. You can tell people all day long, you can show them an application, you can tell them how to do it, but seeing that story and seeing it in person, I think, is the best way to really continue and show how our work is important. So overall, yes, again, it may not be me who visits the program or the project itself, but I do try to get out as much as possible.
On that too, I'd say the more documentation that you can do is great. We're all reporting back on how funds are being used. And so if you can make it convenient to be able to show the success or the process of your work, then that assists on so many levels. So keep that in mind too.
Of course, I'm going to agree. Yes, I love to visit as I can. I am part-time. All of our affiliate executive directors are part-time, so there is a limited time frame there. And what I can do, I like to try to bring my board members out to visit sites. I will say, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but I get a lot of asks for visits before grants are sent. I don't get many for after. So I like the after too. So the only one I don't want to go to is the one we funded, which was the 20 students who smelled bad at a local school and their cleanliness project. That's not really one I need to go and visit. Maybe after to see the results. But most things, yes, happy to go and visit as time allows. And if I can bring a board member along to help them, something they're interested in, I'm happy to do that too.
Thank you. We have a question that may not apply to all of you, so feel free to pass if it doesn't. But we had a question of, there's been a lot of discussion in Northwest Arkansas, especially about how the IRS tax codes affect your grant making or the way that you administer funds or restrict your giving, et cetera. So I would love to know if any of you have a thought about that or if that's applicable to you. We'd love to hear from you.
I'll go ahead and take myself out of the running.
Yeah.
Becca says no.
Yeah, it's just not something that applies
Yeah.
to us.
It's not really for us either as a public foundation.
I can read you the statement from our CFO on this. How about that?
You are on it, Stacey.
Are
I
you
love
ready?
it.
So somebody answers the question, right? All right. Sorry if I'm going to read this, but it gets a little technical here. We can make an unrestricted grant to any 501c3 or equivalent like a church, government agency, city, county, or school. There are tax-exempt organizations that are 501cx, but not 501c3s. An example is VFW. They're typically 501c19s. They're tax exempt, but they're not a 501c3 nonprofit. We can make grants to those tax exempt organizations, but because they don't meet the IRS's criteria for a 501c3, they must be specific about how funding will be used and demonstrate that the funds are being used to benefit the general good and not exclusively for the organization involved. An example might be a chamber of commerce. They might apply for a grant with us to put in trash cans at a public park. They're typically a 501c6 organization, but we have to demonstrate that the funds were not used for a lunch where only the chamber members were permitted to attend. So for that reason, we can't make unrestricted grants to those organizations. And when we do make grants, the grantee must complete some extra expenditure responsibility and keep detailed records for paperwork. Tax-exempt organizations might seek a 501c3 or equivalent as a fiscal sponsor. In that case, we could make a grant to that fiscal sponsor, and the responsibility falls to them to ensure the funds are being used in accordance with the IRS definition of a 501c3. In the example of the Chamber of Commerce, that would be true. The trash cans are in a public park and a benefit for everyone. So,
Thank you.
thank you, Corey.
I kind of want to
for
add
that.
to that real quick. Now that you framed it in that light, it kind of makes a little bit more sense in my head. So with our federal block grant, we can only fund an actual 501c3. It can't be any of the other designations for a nonprofit because that 501c3 status indicates that all members of the community can participate, and it's not going to be exclusive. So a lot of times with like our block grant, we'll have a community center that is not a 501c3. We can't fund that because we can't guarantee that everybody in the community is going to be able to utilize that federal funding. So the federal government is mainly, from what I'm gleaning here, is trying to make sure that everybody in the community can actually receive those funds and utilize them. They have to kind of back that up. That makes a little bit more sense to me now. But we see 501c3s, we see there are other entities that will apply and we have to say no because they don't hold that 501c3 status. And that's only for the block grant in a specific situation with like a community center or a senior center. Those things have to be designated in that light or else we cannot fund them outright.
Thank you. And I just want to remind everyone that this is recorded, so you can share Stacey's answer, Becca's answer, with anyone else at your organization that may have this question. Another question that some folks have had is, and you can pass on this if it's not applicable, are there any program changes to the way that you all operate or what you fund coming in the next few years, this year, in the next few years that you know of, that you'd like to share with us?
No actual changes to how we are operating the programs, but we are increasing the block grant requestable amount from $75,000 to $100,000. That is in the process of the official rule change. I think it's on the governor's desk right now. And so once we get approval, we start the public hearing process. It'll probably be another 60 days before we can enact that. So I don't have an official deadline for the Rural Services Block Grant as of yet, but I will hopefully within the next week or so. We typically call it in August with our other rural community grant cycle, but it will be much later this year, I'm assuming. And just a quick note, it was brought to my attention that I may be confusing some with how I'm wording that block grant. So I am specifically talking about the Rural Services Block Grant. That is the grant that I administer as the director of the Division of Rural Services. The AEDC also has the Community Development Block Grant, which is open to a larger amount of funding for certain communities that are not entitlement cities. And those entitlement cities are your larger cities like Fayetteville, like Little Rock, Pine Bluff. They have a set aside that they apply for separately from the other amount that everybody else can apply for. And then we have the even smaller set aside for my Rural Services Block Grant that I'm speaking about specifically today. But that larger pool of CDBG funding is called the General Assistance Block Grant. And again, it's different from the entitlement cities that they receive annually that they can apply for, that's set aside, and the Rural Services Block Grant. So that may have confused you even more, and if it did, let me know. I'll be happy to explain again.
As far as our funding goes, there's no programming changes that we have to share. We're continually assessing from feedback from grantees and our own team to look at how we need to adapt things. We have upcoming programming that supports organizations, and you can find that on our website, cashcreate.org. It's a program series called YOLO, Year of Learning and Outreach, or I think we changed it after the year, so it's Your Learning and Outreach. So you can check that out for resources to help assist.
Yeah, there's not really a lot of changes for us either. We're still continuing our focus on economic security for women and girls, but we are increasing our investment statewide. We've been located in Central Arkansas physically for 25 years, but we are a statewide foundation. So with that understanding that we are really, really working to expand our footprint statewide. So we are looking at communities like Northwest Arkansas, like Northeast. So we're looking at increasing funding around the state as more of a percentage of what we're investing. So it's continued to be a priority for us to do funding statewide.
I'm just a no. We
Just
don't
no.
have a
No.
change. Yeah.
Stacy passes. That's easy. Thank you. One of the things as a grants professional that I love about doing grants work is that working with funding agencies is so much more beneficial than just the grant funds. That partnership is just so valuable in other ways too. And grant funders, because they work with so many organizations, see a bigger picture that a lot of times we don't if we're just in one organization. And so one of the questions that we have that I'm interested in your answers on is, what do you foresee the biggest issue being for nonprofits in the next 3 to 5 years? And you can restrict that to your grantees or however you'd like to interpret that.
For mine, it's just going to be the ever-changing will of the legislators and the administration that we have, because it dictates, while we have a rule in place for the block grant and CDBG and our other grant programs, each administration can kind of come in and say, well, I would prefer to lean more heavily on this project or this type of project. So we will have consistency, within probably a 4-year period, but with our legislative body also changing, that also impacts it as well. Federal funded, our federally funded grants, if we don't pass a CR each cycle, we're not getting funded. I know that whenever they were not wanting to pass that continuing resolution recently, the HUD, all of that HUD money was going to stop, and we were not going to receive any of it, and that was going to be for all of them. And then luckily they did it like 3 days beforehand or something along those lines. So the main thing that I would touch on would just be the changing will of whoever is in office. And we, defer to what they are choosing to, where their importance lies. And it's not terribly different from one administration to another. Just for a perfect example, the Rural Community Grant, we're emphasizing more fire equipment and fire projects than we are community development. And there is a more urgent need. You can actually see why we are wanting to do that, and why that is being emphasized right now. But whereas in previous years, maybe more community development and parks were being emphasized, it's just kind of the will of the ones who are in office. But yeah, that's all I have to say on that.
Yeah, I'd say, maybe shifting the funders may have a shift in their focus. As was mentioned, previously there's more operational support, and perhaps some of that has changed more toward programming. So I think with that, it's learning or finding a way to adapt, your requests for funding and what that looks like as well. Something that we've seen in the programming support that we offer is, there's, as a nonprofit, you're doing a lot of work, and you have a lot of roles within that. Time is valuable. So we do offer, sessions to learn and support, but you can go to sessions and then you'll still have to do the work as well. So how we've shifted to adapt that need for organizations is offering more one-on-ones with professionals, so that you can use that time to get work done, or perhaps they can do that work for you, because it takes a lot of work to, extra time as well. So we're trying to, knowing that that's a need, adapt with that as well. So I think just understanding what that shift in focus looks like, and see how you can navigate that course as well.
That's a really good point about that capacity. And I will second Becca's points about kind of the changing landscape of funders, and to stay on our nautical theme today, the changing tides and winds and waters. But I think nationwide there's different changes in leadership or politics or whatever it may be, and I think the nature of the work of the nonprofit industry is equity work. It is diversity work. It is these things that come under fire sometimes, or sometimes it's what's great and what people are funding, and it might be relevant to your work someday and maybe not yours, or your work someday and then all of a sudden it's not yours. And I think it is just truly a shifting of focus of funders and just the nature of the world that we live in. And so I guess what I've learned is just build the importance of relationships with the people that are funding your work, because at the end of the day, the job of a foundation, the job of a funder is to give you their money. They have money, and their job is to give it out. You have an organization, your job is to raise money. And so those relationships, but meaningful, transparent, trust-based relationships. I can pick up the phone and call this funder and say, I know the restrictions that legal is giving you right now. We're not stopping the work. How do I frame this application that works for you and also for me? How do I let you do your job and fund me, and also how do I do my job and get the funding? And so truly working relationships, and that's a long-term initiative. That's not just I pick up the phone and they're going to trust what I have to say. That's continuing to cultivate those relationships, sharing stories of success, sharing when you have problems and issues. And so that's been the organization that I work for right now works for women and girls. And so we contact people and we're like, hey, how's it going? Here's the work that we've been able to do. What can we do for funding? And so it's been an interesting process, but we've seen, really those relationships blossom over that communication, if that's helpful. And then the point about capacity building too is as nonprofits, the understanding that the work is hard. The work of nonprofit organizations and staff is hard, and you're overworked and maybe underpaid, and it's you give everything you have. And so the understanding of being kind to each other. I was just sharing that we do summer Fridays at the Women's Foundation. We don't work on Fridays. From Memorial Day to Labor Day, we are closed on Friday. We work really hard the other 4 days of the week, but we just don't work on Friday. And I know that's not an option for our friends at the state.
See how it goes over.
I know. But I mean, it's just one of those things where it's like we need that little break. And so what are the things that your organization can implement for your own staff and your own retention? Because turnover is a real impediment to success. And so how do you make sure, I think there's probably leadership in this room today, how do you make sure your team has what it needs to feel valued and appreciated and not just completely drained and fatigued? And so understanding and as funders, understanding that capacity for organizations is really, really important. So keeping in mind your team and building them up is really hard, especially in the nonprofit landscape.
I feel like we could do a whole hour on what the biggest issues for nonprofits is going to be on a broad scale. So I'm going to try to bring it in to Northwest Arkansas. What I see is competition with and the replication of services with a lot of organizations. We are in a very entrepreneurial part of the state, and I see that as that comes about in nonprofit organizations as well. I'm constantly getting calls from people who want to start a new nonprofit or who want to meet with me about a new nonprofit. And frequently I'm thinking, why are they starting their own when they could be combining services with somebody else? So I'm trying to connect people so that we don't, I literally had calls from 3 different cat spay organizations in 1 week serving Washington County who all wanted to meet with me. And that makes it really hard for me to direct funders. Which one do I go with? I don't know. I don't know I don't want to go out and visit the cat shelters. You know what I mean? That's not what I want to do. So I would like to see our nonprofits and organizations collaborating a little bit more, some abilities and some ways for them to meet and communicate together so that we don't have this huge duplication of services and everybody trying to kind of hold their own little spot. So I would challenge Northwest Arkansas, eager, go-getter nonprofit folks who really want to do good and are doing good to try to see how you can work together with organizations and so we don't have this overlap of services.
If you do need someone to visit cat shelters,
Would you
and pet
like to
kittens,
go? Okay, I'm calling you.
happy to be of service.
I'll do the dogs, you can do the cats.
Sign me up for both.
Okay.
Thank you, Stacy. If I could ask a follow-up question of the panel, I know oftentimes in funder applications you're asked who your partners are or how you're avoiding that duplication of services. So I was wondering if anyone else has any thoughts about, is that kind of collaboration something you like to see? Does that make grantees or applicants more competitive for your grants? Or if you have any thoughts about that.
For my grant programs, we like to see applicants stacking different funding methods to make a larger project. So that rural community grant, it is a 50-50 matching grant. Communities can apply for up to $15,000, but they have to match that. So if they request $15,000, they have to put $15,000 into the project as well. That can be with donated materials and donated land. We're having an issue with our donated labor piece, which we've allowed for 20 years, but because somebody dug up the statute and it wasn't in there, we have to go get that changed. So we're bringing that back online, and I'll be happy to chat more about that later. But because that one is such a small request amount, we like to see when it's a part of a larger project with like a USDA grant or FEMA, think DRA, if we're a part of a larger grant project, I like to see communities kind of stack that funding. An example of that would be the city of Marshall recently applied for a $100,000 tractor basically to remove storm debris and clear other types of debris. And they were able to stack our grant with a USDA grant and then also part of a DRA grant. So that was 3 different funding sources coming together for one project. And when I have that, I can sell that towards our executive director, look at all of the different funding sources that are coming together to make this happen. It's a larger project. We can also justify the match money for that specific grant program. Since that one is a state grant, we can use the money that was received from the federal grant as match, so they don't have to actually have anything out of pocket if they can stack them on top of each other appropriately. But you can't take a state grant and match it with a state grant, federal, good to go. But Yeah, we have to make that distinction every now and then with people, and I totally get it. But yes, if we see that there are if it's a part of a larger project, and it doesn't have to be that the project itself is $200,000 versus $50,000, but the fact that they've gone out, exhausted all of their options, they found this other project to help make their project what they needed it to be, I can take that and use it when I'm actually in the recommendation process to say this is a great project. They're incorporating multiple different grant fundings sources to actually get done what they needed to get done. So overall, yes, I think it's something that I like to see. I like to see us working together, and that's kind of in the same vein of what Stacy was talking about. We all need to come together, especially with our grant funders, and use funds as much as we can so that people can get as much help as they can.
As an organization, part of our programming is to convene and hold gatherings as a place for arts organizations and artists to connect. So we see ourselves as a connector in that way. And we want, I think we encourage to sharing those resources because it helps as an organization with your capacity. I think that too, that collaboration can help with sustainability. It depends on, what the funding is, but I think that, instead of duplicating a lot of services, sometimes it's helpful to connect and to see how you can use that together. And so I think that's what I can offer.
Yeah, we love to see collaboration always. We collaborate on a lot of things that we do as an organization, but I think an application that's like we offer this service, but it's really a wraparound. Our organization is a wraparound organization, or this program addresses all of these things, and here's who we're working with. I think a lot of times it can add legitimacy, especially if it's a smaller organization or a newly established organization. If you have the partners and the relationships that are also involved, it helps with legitimacy, but it also helps with creating really great work for your folks that are participating in the program. And so we love collaboration, but we don't say no to things that are brilliant ideas that are brought to us that are maybe not as collaborative but need to happen. So say yes if it's truly a collaboration, but no if it's not. Like, that's fine too.
Right, yeah. If you're not collaborating, which most of our proposals are not, tell us why you're unique and why you're different and why you're meeting a need that other people are not. That's helpful as well. And I will say that a lot of people are still intrigued with matching grants, matching dollars. If that's something you can throw into a proposal or kind of work some other way, that shows that you're working a lot of different avenues to try to get funding. And that old tried and true matching gift thing still seems to carry a lot of weight with a lot of my folks. So.
Thank you so much. We have asked all the questions that people had asked, so good job, y'all. You got done early. I've moderated this panel for 6 or 7 years, and nobody asked my favorite question, and so I'm just going to throw it out there, and you can pass if you want to because you were not prepped. But my favorite question is, we've talked a lot about what grantees or applicants should do working with you. What should they not do working with you? What are the things that are either annoying to you or make it difficult for you to work with them or fund them? What are the icebergs that our ship is going to hit with your organization? Thank you for laughing. I really appreciate that. Anyone that wants to take that or is interested.
For the purpose of my grants, being transparent is really important. So if we have certain requirements for all of these grants, and so if you tell me that you have ownership, if a city owns a building, I'm going to take you on your word, but you also have to submit a deed that shows that the city owns the building so I can verify it and fact check it. And a lot of times I will get a deed that is in fact not owned by the city or even a nonprofit. It's owned by like a private organization. And so we have to get into this uncomfortable situation where maybe the person didn't necessarily know, or they thought, oh, we kind of own it, we've operated it. Again, as state and federal grants, like, we have to document everything that we're doing. So if you tell me something, I need to show that it is true and document it so that when we're audited, it's there. So for me, it's just being transparent. I know sometimes we don't want to hear no, but sometimes that is the answer from a legal perspective, and we can't get around it. And then if you are not as transparent up front, we get to this whole process where you've done a whole lot of work, and then we have to say no after you've begun the process, and that's not fun to do either. So for me, for the purposes of my grants, it's mainly just tell me the truth, tell me what you really want to do with this project, and we will try to work with you the best way possible. For example, we can't fund, we had a applicant come forward recently that wanted to do a baseball field, and we had been under the assumption that it was on city-owned land or county-owned land, and we were just kind of running with it. They filled out all the paperwork, they did all of the resolutions and certification letter. I get the deed and it's a school district, and then, we can't fund that, and then I have to get on the, phone with the mayor and everybody else, and they're very confused as to why. Well, you told us that it was this, and I was like, well, I was under the assumption that this was who owned it. And so it kind of goes back to that creating trust in a relationship with your community partners as well. That bridge wasn't burned, but I definitely was upset that we weren't able to fund that project because I didn't know the information that I needed to know on the front hand or at the very beginning. And again, they've applied for another grant for a different project and we funded them. It's, again, a bridge was not burned there, but it really puts a lot more work on the community leaders to have to do that, and then they have to go back before city council or before quorum court and be like, we are actually not moving forward with this because this happened. And so then your elected officials are on the hook with their community leaders. I mean, it can create a lot of blowback with which we could just have told them the answer up front, having known the actual ownership issue. So again, transparency is key. I have to document everything that is stated to me per our regulations for audit purposes. So nothing can really get swept under the rug or overlooked.
I'd say communication is a big component too. So we all have jobs that we're doing, and I'd say communicating in a timely manner helps us do our job as well. And then positive communication skills, I think, is really helpful. Just knowing that we're all kind of working together, and those communication skills as humans, as organizations, are really helpful and beneficial.
I feel like the transparency is so important, and as organizations, looking at what the foundation or the funders really actually fund. And this isn't anything that's like annoying to me or a turn off for us as an organization funding, but we get applications a lot of times that have nothing to do with what we fund. And I just feel so bad that like an organization spent all this time and all their resources on filling out this application, and I'm like, but we don't, like, we try to be really explicit. And so I would just advise against like chasing funding for things that you don't do, or saying, okay, well, they fund this, let me create something brand new that fits this just to get the funding. It's just like there's so many funders out there, and I know sometimes it can be really hard to do the research and find the exact fit, but it takes a lot less time to do that, I think, than go through all these processes that are not relevant to what these funders are doing. So I guess I would just caution against that. I see a lot of nodding heads, so I think everyone knows this, but I feel like it's so important to reiterate that a lot.
I'm going to piggyback on what Becky said. That was that happens in our case too. I would say of the 50 plus proposals we got for our this last Giving Tree cycle, there were 10 to 12 that were easy no's because they did not fit the guidelines that were set in the criteria when people applied for them. I mean, some of the people weren't even serving people in Washington County. So it's pretty, because I think we have 29 affiliates. Sometimes an organization will send the same proposal to maybe all 29 affiliates in hopes that they're going to get funded. But it shows when you don't do your homework and when you don't follow the guidelines. Or if our grants are up to $2,500 and someone asks for $10,000, we're not going to do that. So just make sure you're following the guidelines. It's that easy. And listen, I get it. I've done it before too, where you're sending basically the same proposal to different organizations. Just take the time to make sure that you're crossing the T's and dotting the I's so that it's specific to what our requests are. So.
Yeah, I would say that too. Like, make sure you meet the eligibility criteria, because that's just, it takes time and resources in applying for those, and then also on the other end going through that and having to check eligibility as well in meeting that criteria. So yeah, That's a good check.
And your time is too valuable to waste.
Yeah.
Thank you all. That's great not what to do advice. So I think the last question I have is I've heard from all of you, which is wonderful that you're relational, that you'll talk to folks about what you do and people ask you questions. So if we're sitting out here and thinking, oh, this sounds like what we do, this sounds like a good fit, how do you recommend people get in touch with you or reach out to you? What's the first step to someone that might be a new applicant?
I just encourage people to give me a call. I have plenty of cards up here to give to everyone today, but also you can find all of this information on arkansasedc.com, and we will be under the Rural Services Community Development page. But that's where all of that information lies. And then I did want to use this time just to kind of plug our new director of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Development Division within the AEDC. Her name is Esperanza Masana Crane, and they have a few things coming out that I can't necessarily speak on because I'm not the director of that division. But if you're familiar with the old Innovate Arkansas, which was designed to help out entrepreneurship and new entrepreneurs, that contract ended with Innovate Arkansas, and they are establishing a new one, and it is called Arise. That should technically, I believe the contract has been signed, but I'm not sure when that actually will go into effect. But I have some of Esperanza's cards up here if you're interested in entrepreneurship or any of the things that they're doing with small business development. I have some of her cards up here for y'all to grab as well. And again, I'm sorry that I can't talk on all of her things that are coming out, but I wouldn't want to tell y'all something that I don't 100% know. But she will definitely be. I warned her that I was coming up here and I was giving out a lot of her cards, so she does expect phone calls.
Yeah, I would say first to hop on our website, cashcreate.org, and check out all the programming that we have and for arts and cultural organizations. And then there's a contact page on that site too that gives you access to select certain topics that you can connect with people directly from there. And you can always email me, Lisa Marie at cashcreate.org. It helps just to reach out and to build those relationships and to start from there, to get on people's radar. I think that's great. And to stay on the radar in a good way.
Yeah. On the good radar. So same for us. Our website is just embarrassingly long. It's Women's Foundation Arkansas.org. But I have a bunch of cards up here and would love to speak with you if you work with women and girls across the state, or I guess in this community. Would love to have those conversations, and we just like to hear about the work that's happening. So again, I have plenty of cards up here, and Esperanza, we are we fangirl over Esperanza all the time. We honored her in 2022 as our Woman of the Year in Business in Arkansas for the work that she's done for small businesses in our state. Is just so impressive and so important to our state and the economic development of our state. So we honored her as the Woman of the Year in Business a couple years ago. So big fans.
I would say reaching out to me by email is the best and fastest way to reach me, since I'm part-time and the only person in the office. So that allows me to be able to get back to you when I'm in the office and on hours. I don't love our phone app, so I don't recommend trying that first. So yeah, emails.
Wonderful. Is there anything that any of you panelists wanted to share that you just came here hoping to share that we didn't get to?
I have a resource I thought of while I was sitting in this chair. If anyone is interested in, but maybe intimidated by federal funding or bigger outside of the state funding, it's interesting. Arkansas as a state is incredibly generous. We have a lot of in-state funding, but we rank really low in the nation in funding from outside sources outside of this state, especially federal funding. So we're actually, the Women's Foundation is a fiscal agent for an organization called the Connection Hub, and I haven't asked their permission to share this, so I'm going to do it anyway. Sorry, Abby Hughes-Holzclaw, if you see this. But it's called the Connection Hub, and they offer capacity building and help with federal grant applications. And so they monitor federal opportunities that might be applicable in this state, and then they help nonprofits across the state with capacity to apply for them. So if it's, we actually were one of their clients and got a DRA grant because of their help. And so it was a multi-year grant for some work that we working on right now, but they helped with the budgeting process. They helped with the application process. I mean, things that we could do, but it's just such a heavy lift for a small organization. It's so intimidating. They helped building out reporting materials. And so it's called, again, the Connection Hub. So if you're interested in that, let me know. But it's a good resource. It's relatively new, so they're still trying to find their footing. But I think it's so important in our state to help build capacity. Love it.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I would love a round of applause for our excellent panelists today. Thank you all so much for taking the time to share with us. And I want to give a special shout out to Becca and Becky, who are here from Little Rock. And had
Becca
to
drove in this morning.
get up early to be here.
That's
So
impressive.
thank you
I did
all.
not drive in this morning.
Thank you for the coffee. It was much appreciated.
And again, thank you so much to Fayetteville Public Library for hosting this event. And they have a series of events and resources for nonprofits. And so be sure to check out their Nonprofit and Small Business Resource Center as well. So thank you all very much for coming, and have a great rest of your day.